Les Midis du Festival, débats, rencontres.
Ok, bonjour à toutes et tous. Bienvenue pour ce Midi du Festival dédié à Layale Chaker, que je remercie d'être présente. Probably we should speak in English. I'm just, yeah, right. Okay. So I will try to switch, and Layale too, from French to English, so that everybody in the room can understand what is happening. So I was saying a beautiful introduction, and I was really warmly thank you, Layale, again for joining and for being with us today. It's a great pleasure. Very happy to introduce to all of you Layale Chaker. She's a wonderful violinist, composer, opera creator. Donc, Layale est violoniste, compositrice, créatrice d'opéra. And tonight you will perform a beautiful concert in the Conservatoire at 9. So if you we still have tickets, so you can absolutely get your tickets from now for tonight with Sarafand, and we will talk about Sarafand. So Layale va ce soir interpréter un magnifique concert avec son projet Sarafand. C'est à 9h au Conservatoire, dans l'auditorium, et nous allons donc parler de ce programme ensemble aujourd'hui. Alors pour commencer, Layale, j'aimerais que toi tu nous racontes ton parcours qui est assez international déjà, assez exceptionnel et je pense auquel on ne s'attend pas nécessairement. Au départ tu es violoniste et tu as fait un parcours absolument extraordinaire avec le violon pour compagnon et je voudrais te laisser aussi présenter ton parcours. So I'm just asking Layale if Layale you could introduce your path. The path, musical path you had with first your violin, and how now you're creating your own projects still with your violin. So please, I would be very happy.
Should I do it in English or French?
I think probably let's start in English. Do you want me to translate, or do you prefer to translate yourself?
Let's try. Okay.
Let's try. We'll see.
Okay.
Right.
So I started learning the violin when I was around 6 years old in Beirut, in Lebanon, where I'm from. And at the time, it was the conservatory where we studied was, very much a conservatory in two separate departments where we could occasionally meet, but it was basically, Western music, classical orchestral music, and then Arabic music. So you had to kind of choose you had to choose your path quite early on, even if you didn't really know what you were more interested in. And then you had to occasionally, I took on the Western classical path, and I occasionally had to take sometimes some Arabic music theory. I had to take some oud lessons at some point, some Arabic music history, but the focus was really on the violin as an orchestral instrument or as a Western instrument. At least the focus was on the Western repertoire. Up until when I was, and also I have to say all of our teachers were, for the most part, from Eastern Europe, so I had a wonderful Russian, Romanian teachers. And then in 2006, after the war, many of those teachers left, and we had another wave of teachers coming in, and that's where I met a teacher that kind of shaped things very differently for me. He was Iraqi. He came from Baghdad, and he had also taught a beautiful generation of violinists in Jordan as well. And he changed my perspective on things because he was the solo violinist of the opera of Baghdad, but he was also a very beautiful improviser and practitioner of Arabic maqam. So he kind of taught me or made it seamless for me to do both and to navigate between both. And that at the time where that came at a time where I had a lot of questionings about my own practice, and so he started to encourage me more into improvisation. First, very informally, but then we would start, I would start improvising my Mozart cadenzas, or just really try to think of it a little bit more as an extension of what I was already doing, rather than having to choose. And then I kind of continued on with this practice of navigating between the Western repertoire, but also trying to find to follow my curiosity in improvisation and in integrating my musical language, the musical language that I didn't practice in the conservatory, but that live around me my whole life as someone who grew up in Lebanon. And then came the move to Paris because I wanted to continue studying. And then from then on to London, to the Royal Academy. And then I integrated the West Eastern Divan Orchestra, conducted by Daniel Barenboim, where I spent many years as well. And for a long time, I thought that this was going to be my trajectory, that I was going to be, like an orchestral violinist. But I did feel that there was a side of my practice that I wasn't really exploring very much. And so I took a leap of faith. First of all, I took a sabbatical from the orchestra. And I gave myself, I think, a deadline of 2 years or a year. I don't know what it was, but something like. And then during that time, I thought to myself, I'm going to seek studying with artists that really inspire me. And so I sought a teacher of Ottoman court music at the time. I had an interest in that. His name is Mikalis Kouloumis, and he lived in Brighton, so an hour away from London. And then I studied, and then I went to New York. At the time, I did a year. On paper, it was an exchange year, but really, I was there to study with Bassam Saba, who's a wonderful nai player, Lebanese nai player, who passed away, unfortunately, during COVID. So I went a parallel route as I was also going through let's say, the more classical path that is more, the safer way, even though I don't know that there's a safe way in music.
Probably not.
Probably not.
It's all a question of risks.
Yes. Yeah. And it's very crooked. It's a very crooked path. It's not a one shot. I did a lot of, when I say it like that, it seems like it's a very one-liner thing, but it's really not. It's a lot of pausing in the middle and questioning and trying different things and figuring out like how to even put on paper your musical ideas and how to make them make sense and what's the best vehicle. Like, is it notated music? Is it somewhere in the middle? And actually, Sarafand is one of the earlier experiments I've tried in an attempt to answer that, because I was wondering, should it be chamber music, should it be jazz, and should it be a lead sheet, or should it be arranged, or should it be somewhere in the middle? And it's still a question. Like, I think now, with the little more experience that I have, I feel like the music or the project itself kind of dictates what you want to write and how you want to write for it. But it's an everlasting process. I'm in continuous learning. Like, yeah.
It's absolutely passionate. Just wondering, do people need a French translation to what just has been said, or is it quite clear in English and we'll keep going in English? Let's keep English for this talk. Yeah, great. Okay, keep going in English.
Let's work
Perfect.
For you.
So yes, you were talking about Sarafand, and probably, I'm not sure everybody knows here, who are the players of Sarafand and how did you choose to create this quartet? Because it's not a usual jazz quartet, and maybe you want to just describe. So we have a cello, we have,
So Sarafand, yeah, exactly. It debuted as an experiment, and the earlier format of that was when I was still living in France, and I knew that I didn't want just a purely jazz sound, but I also knew that I wanted a rhythm section, and I wanted the freedom to improvise, and I wanted everybody to be on the same understanding of what it means to navigate through written music and a large part of interpretation and freedom within the written structures. So in the beginning, actually the very first iteration of Sarafand, it was percussion, tuba, and oud.
Tuba,
yeah, Michel Godard.
All right, okay.
Or serpent aussi,
yeah.
jouer le serpent.
Oui.
And it was a great way for me to kind of understand how to navigate these structures. And then listening back, I was like, oh, I would still like to have a thick string texture. I miss that in the sound. And it was also right about the time where I was kind of thinking of a New York-based form or like band. And that's when I started to look for musicians who were very good at reading, but also very good at interpreting, and had, could bring a different perspective into the music. So we have currently, we've changed personnel a lot over the years, but currently, and since the last album, we have the same personnel, and it's Philip Golob on piano and microtonal keyboard. So we've also developed kind of a different language for the piano itself. Sam Menai on bass, Jake Charkey on cello, and John Hatfield on drums. And what's beautiful is that every person comes from a different background, whether it's Sam or John coming from a very I was going to say just jazz, but it's not even true, because they are also very well versed in so many different musical languages. Or Philip, who's very experimental with his approach to microtonality, and with whom he's been a collaborator of mine on so many different other projects, including the operas that I work on. Or Jake, who's more versed in Hindustani music, and who brings that sensibility as well, and which creates a beautiful parallel with the Arabic music and maqam in the idiom that we use in the ensemble. And so all of these perspectives or interpretations of microtonality, harmony, and that push and pull between the written and the orality can coexist in the sound. Yeah.
Which is quite impressive at the end. And also a lot of improvisation in what you're doing.
A lot of improvisation, a lot of written. It's also what I really like is that the line is blurred between when we're improvising and when we're actually reading the score. And so that also challenges the idea of even like a traditional lead sheet of, going through a structure, going to the solo section, going back to another structure. Even the structure itself is malleable, and it bends but also the ensemble playing itself over the years has matured so much to let us get to that point as well in the interpretation.
Which we can listen to. It's magic. It's very organic now.
How it's very organic,
sounds,
exactly.
And that's quite impressive. Yeah, wonderful. And also, because tonight you're performing with Sarafand a very specific program it's based on poetry also, and I think that's an important thing to talk, and also with this idea of this radio lost in the sea. And I think it's very important also because when here we are an opera festival, so we are used to tell stories, basically, but it's not only in the festival through voices and that you can tell stories, and I think you also have this strong power to really tell stories with your music, with instrumentalists around you, and I think it's very good. Where does this idea of a radio lost in the sea came into your mind? Because it's quite it's a very beautiful idea, and very I think a strong Mediterranean idea also. But maybe you want to share the story behind your program.
Well, I mean, I feel like I unofficially trained as a dramaturg working on opera. I feel like I serve as my librettist's unofficial dramaturg, and I feel like dramaturgy is such an incredible... I feel like as a composer, if you're writing opera or if you're writing music for the stage, you cannot but also be a little bit a dramaturg, because there's so much of the development of the story, or of the linearity, or even if it's a non-linear story, that you can pace with the music. It's all about the rhythm of it. It's all about how you're going to develop it over time and in the space. So I feel that I have that sensibility that has developed more over the years from working with theater makers. Not necessarily just opera, but really just also music for theater as well, and text and poetry. So I feel that also radio afloat kind of, I tend to write music in parallel to simultaneously over many different projects. So when I was writing Radio Afloat, I was also writing Ruinous Gods.
Your opera.
Yeah, so I really don't work chronologically. It kind of, there are different lanes and I sprinkle a little here and I sprinkle in here, and there are parallels that become evident as I work. And so also my mind is, geared toward dramaturgy, for example, or geared towards like developing a concrete, story arc. And so I feel like the poem that I've focused on to work on for Radio Afloat, which is an epic by Uns El Haj, yes, the poem is called The Trace of Blue Passion, La Trace de la Passion Bleue, it was translated actually by a friend of mine. It only exists in Arabic otherwise. It's an epic, so it's a poem, but it's an epic. And it talks about a trajectory of migration birds and the fragility of the ecosystems in which we live in, and our relationship to each other and our relationship to our lands and the lands we belong on, and how, at some point, I'm paraphrasing because it's a translation, but he says, it is in the nature of creatures to harm themselves. And even in the Arabic version, you don't really know if themselves means hurt ourselves or hurt the other. It's nuanced, it's deliberately ambiguous in that way. And he says creatures, he doesn't really also say human beings or animals, and it is also in Arabic is nuanced, so you don't really know which creature he's talking about. But it is in the nature of creatures to harm themselves. So there's so many interpretations to that one line, but it is a little bit the trajectory of the whole epic. And it also traces the idea of migration birds, and then the wisdom of migration birds and how we perceive migration within animals or birds as the most natural thing, but we don't perceive that to be as natural among human beings. It's much more systemized, and all of a sudden borders exist, etc.
Controls and
yes. So I had the reflection of that during Ruinous Gods, and so I continued a little bit with Radio Afloat. I generally feel I'm always trying to tell the same story. Generally, it's always the same story, just from a different angle. And so with Radio Afloat, I just imagined, I was also living in a lot of imagery and scenic design at the time and thinking of all these things. And I was just thinking of the trace of the blue passion, which was, again, I wouldn't know if it was a limitless sky or it was the sea. But I imagined it as just a wide terra incognita where this one device is trying to catch anything from either side of the Mediterranean, any signal, and going in and out all the time on a raft boat or sur un radeau, etc. So this image really nourished me, and then the album is conceived like that as well. So it's also an epic in a way. It's like a trajectory of stories, beginning to end, and it's meant to be experienced in that way. So we'll perform Radio Afloat. We'll also play some music from the album before that, in a rhyme, which is also based on poetry, but from a very different angle. It's much more the bones of Arabic poetry, the way it's structured, the metrics,
the architecture,
the rhymes, the metrics, because they're all based on rhythmic structures that translate very often into rhythm structures that you see in muwashahat or classical Arabic music forms in Arabic maqam. But also there's a lot of free verse, and there's some pieces that are more inspired by poetry that only exists orally or is transmitted in very specific regions of South Lebanon, Northern Palestine, South Syria, etc.
Yeah, it's quite impressive because in your work you're combining so many references around one common story, and I think that's really much needed because it's you can't choose one category, and you don't have to, and I think that's a very powerful and needed message today for music, also to have this freedom of connecting music with the reality of what we're living, and also the reality of what you left is also you traveled from Beirut to Paris to London, to New York. And as you said, it can be a very natural feeling also. And it's really something also because it's also questioning this power dynamic between vulnerabilities, if I can say, of ecosystem, in the same time with the reality of conflicts and all these dynamics. And I think it's really something quite important in your world. It's to reconnect also this consciousness that we belong to Earth, we belong to a certain ecosystem. In the same time, sometimes we can consider that you don't belong to it in some ways, which is absolutely absurd. So it's really this power dynamic that you're questioning also. Yeah, yeah. I think it's quite much needed. So also, it's lead me because you talk a bit about your parallel work with your opera, and probably here also for the audience, I think it's quite important to know, if you don't know, that Layale, you were part of the Academy of the Festival d'Aix a couple of years ago, and Layale took part in the program Women Opera Makers with the mentorship of Katie Mitchell, and it's really a program quite fabulous because we have young creators in the opera field together and exchanging a lot of things. And I know this kind of program, so maybe you want to describe your own experiences better with Katie and talk about the impacts also it had on your work and on what you're doing now also, because I think it's quite important.
Yeah, I mean, it's very special to come back here, and because the academy, the context of the academy was the first, in a way, one of the first times that I had been given the space to talk about Ruinous Gods, to talk about the opera, to think of it with other people in the room. I also had the opportunity to pitch it, which also was very, it was incredibly helpful for the piece. And just more generally, this time at the academy and this workshop in specific gave me so many collaborators, even collaborators beyond, because at the time, when you're working on a project, you're living in that project, you're not thinking of the next one. But at the time, I really needed that, I needed to be held by the hand, Katie loves to say Planet Opera, so I really needed to be held by the hand as I entered a Planet Opera. And she really has, Katie's an incredible mentor to this day. I speak to her once a month. We have mentorship sessions, and she's my sounding board until now. And she also does it for many other artists from that academy, not just that year, but like all years together. We all come to her with our questions, and and she puts us in touch with each other between different years, or other artists that she's mentored in other situations, more informally, etc. So it was a beautiful experience being there in the room with these incredible makers from different places, and who were all working on their projects, and those projects were at different levels of maturity. Some were like very new, some were a reflection of over many years, and it was very helpful to see, how to take a project to fruition from a very small idea, putting it on the paper, talking about it, learning how to talk about your project was incredibly helpful. Because on paper you're thinking, oh my God, like I just have to explain my project. But actually learning to articulate and explain your project in just a few lines trains you to understand your own project very well. And you're not able to communicate your vision until you really understand the depth of your own vision in a way that you can communicate it effectively to those around you. Especially when you are trying to create a project that is so big. It's massive. And you need to plant the trust, seeds of trust around it, and it can be feel monumental if that's your first time, because where are you planting seeds of trust, but you don't really have yet something to show for it. So learning how to articulate it is incredibly helpful and incredibly important. And I knew that, but I just didn't know how important it was. So being with Katie and these women over that period of time, and then after that, being in those professional days and being able to pitch was an immense period of growth. And also, as I said, like it planted the seeds for the next things. So I'm actually right now developing my second opera, and all my collaborators come from the academy, whether it's the dramaturg, Pier Sandra Di Matteo, or Lisenka Haibauer-Castagnon, who's the director. I also met my current publisher from Durand Salabert et Chic during the professional days. Yes, I mean...
So it has a strong impact.
It was a strong impact.
Academy.
Yes, it was a strong impact, and it keeps on giving in many ways. So it's, there's definitely... of course, the professional side, but there's also the interpersonal relationships that matter so much when you're creating such intimate works also.
Absolutely, yes. And do you want, maybe, I think it's great that you could share a bit about your first opera, because the second one, we know it's cooking now, but your first opera called Runner's Gods, that you created in Spoleto, if I'm not wrong, with the Barbican also in London, that's what we said, It's about, it's quite specific, and I think it's very linked with, also, as you said, and you explained it very well, with the story of radio afloat and the poetry. It's not about one specific drama with characters as a kind of conventional, I could say, opera writing. You decided to create an opera about this resignation syndrome, as we call it. And I think it's this state of absence that children can face when they are facing a traumatizing situation, a very hard situation. Maybe you want to explain a bit more this syndrome and why you wanted to do an opera, not about a kind of a story with step 1, step 2, step 3, so on, but more about this state of very specific state linked with specific stories of children. I think it's very important because it's also related to your concert tonight in some ways also, so yeah.
So Runner's Gods, I'll tell you more about the synopsis a little bit. So you'll see that there is a story, but it's not a linear or chronological story in that sense. It's more a series of vignettes, or it's a reverie a little bit. It's like you're sleepwalking through it a little bit. So the resignation syndrome is a syndrome that happens to children in a state of forced migration. And it's been identified in Sweden among Syrian refugee children, and then it started propagating around the world ever since. So it's been around 15 years now, where children who are in a forced situation of migration, mostly in either resettlement centers or refugee camps, fall to sleep, and the sleep it's almost a coma. So sometimes they sleep for months, sometimes a year or two. And in this story, we mythologize a little bit this syndrome. It starts with a young girl and her mother. So there's also a lot of parallel or mythologizing based on Demeter and Persephone, if you're familiar with this myth. And also a little bit of Dante's Inferno, so I'll explain now. But basically, the little girl falls to sleep while they are on a journey, or as they are on a journey, we don't really know, fleeing an unnamed country from the global south to an unnamed country in the global north. And during this journey, or maybe a little before the journey, the little girl slips into this underworld, a little bit like Persephone. And in this underworld, she finds... She's in sort of a post-apocalyptic scenography a little bit, and there she starts meeting other children with other stories. So the way it's conceived is there are 6 singers, and 2 of them are doubling as doctor figures, and then together, and aided with a bigger chorus, they form together a chorus. So at different points of the opera, we have the individual stories of each of the children and each of the journeys they've been through, but together it's a morphing chorus. So the chorus is at once, it's the sleeping children chorus, and then at other times it's a chorus of refugees. And then another time, this same chorus becomes a chorus of migratory birds. And she's aided by a person called Crow, a person / bird called Crow, who's a little bit her guide into the underworld, who was actually, for our first situation, was played by Karim Sulaiman.
Oh, he was in concert here a couple of days ago. I think a lot of people could attend to the concert by Karim. Yes.
So the crow is a very important figure because it kind of guides the little girl through the meanders of this underworld. And it's very oniric, it's very poetic. The story itself starts from such a tragic premise that I like to think that none of that heaviness of the tragedy transpires that directly, because it's not a linear story. It's much more a dreamscape, and it's a backdrop against which we ask a lot of philosophical questions about the nature of migration and how we perceive it, and really what kind of world we are leaving to these children, so that they are saying, no, thank you. I would rather be sleeping for a long time than be part of this reality. Yes, and there's also a lot of work on throughout the piece. There's a lot of work on Aramaic poetry, like from divinations to different gods, so very ancient divinations as well that come in and out from the
which refers to the title Renner's Gods.
Exactly. Yes,
indeed. Wonderful. And also about the staging, you choose to work with the Zoukak company in Lebanon, and I think that's quite interesting because you worked with a company, not only with one stage director. So it's quite also a collective approach about the staging, and I think it was co-created, really. So also, do you want to maybe give a snap of how does it look like, this opera? So you said we have these 6 singers, and for the music and for the staging, how was it? If you could describe a bit, I think.
So the staging was created by another artist called Joël, who does a lot of actually scenography for film usually.
Yes.
So for Wes Anderson, Ridley Scott, she's done a lot of scenography for films that also are very, rooted in imagery, strong imagery, dreamscape imagery. And Zoukak are actually long-time collaborators of mine. We've worked together on so many theater productions. So that was their first opera production.
Wow.
But we've done Anatomy of Titus of Heiner Müller in Germany, and we've done Ghalia's Miles, which is a piece that they've written themselves. And we chose. I chose them to do this, the direction, because first of all, they devise direction, so they don't come with like a directed score already. I don't know if you're familiar with how opera creation works. Usually, there's the conductor's rehearsal, and then there's the director's rehearsal, and it's very hierarchical. We don't, and I felt like the story itself, I felt like we had to, I could not imagine building a story like that with that classical, that's very hierarchical like way of developing a work.
Yeah, like
I wanted
fragmented steps.
Yes.
No, it was more collective from A to Z. Yeah.
Exactly. I felt like we needed to be ethically on the same wavelength. I thought we needed to depart from the same ethical understanding of what we're creating, why we're creating it, what we're trying to say together, and devising everything from it. So the way that they work really helps singers find their movements from a place of true, deep intention versus just blocking on the score. Yeah. And many times we ended up with a direction that came spontaneously from the singers, so like that let them find their own ways of expressing themselves very organically. And actually the singers were very confused in the beginning, they were like, I'm not being told what to do.
Yeah. It's always a shock when you change the process.
So when theater makers devise work, they're basically pulling it out of you or making you get there on your own, so that you really own what you're doing, versus telling you, you have bar 5 step here and bar 10 you have to, So it's a very different approach to devising and extracting from you the way the final piece is going to look like. And even amongst themselves, so it was Maya Zbib and Omar Abi Azar, who are the two main founders of the Zukak Theatre Company, which is the only it's the oldest operating theatre company in Lebanon.
Okay.
And the only one that is a professional theatre company. So they also have a lot of work. They have also, I felt they also had the right ethos to do this work because they've themselves also worked a lot in refugee camps in Lebanon and in Calais, and they did a lot of work with refugee children. So they really knew what they were talking about, and they knew how to communicate that experience to the singers who have never, lived an experience like that. But they've set the scene in a way, and they've communicated a lot about their own experience to be able to build this together in a way that feels organic and respectful to the work.
Wonderful. Maybe it's a future of opera. We hope that. And also for the music, it was also a bit parallel to Sarafand, what you're doing, musically speaking, aesthetically speaking, let's say, because also you had this kind of course, work with some classical elements in the sounds, but also including other influences and culture. And I guess to come back also to Sarafand, it's always this question of really navigating and combining, but it sounds very natural to have all these influences and reference and snaps from different worlds together. And I think it's quite a magic way to create music, and it's quite beautiful. Yeah, great. I was wondering, I don't know if after this conversation you do have questions also about for Layale about her work, because I think it's time for question and reply. Yes, give you my. Okay, thank you.
Hi. Yes. I do have a question actually, especially since when you said at the beginning you started with like more Western music, and then you had to take some theory about like different music of the sorts and improvisation and whatnot. So there's this, I think, maybe stereotype, I'd say, with practicing like Mozart concertos or Beethoven concertos, or what we consider traditional here, for being the music that's more set in stone, and which I think is sad, because I'd like to think that even though we are kind of comme un artisan, but we are kind of like looking at what the composer thought and more looking at other people. I'd like to think that we keep our creative mind active, and that we can do things that are specifically our own, all while respecting the music that we're playing. What is something that maybe you could you'd like to tell musicians such as myself and other people, what you could get out of the style hopping, if I may say so, that you've done, that maybe some classical musicians are missing out on when they're doing their music. Yeah.
Thank you. Did you mean like just specifically historical performance, or just generally just playing the repertoire?
I guess playing the repertoire, where like I think do you understand like whatever Mozart, Bach, Beethoven, Haydn better or something through different musics, and what is maybe something that us.
Do you feel like let me see if I understand your question. Pas de problème. Si tu veux reposer en français, c'est pas grave aussi. Mais do you mean that playing other musics has helped my understanding of Mozart, Beethoven? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah. Is there something that we?
Well, yes. There's, first of all, I mean, the principal thing, I think, which is very small and very big at the same time, is like giving yourself permission. Like giving yourself permission to own this work at an individual level. And I think it sounds small, but it's actually very big, because it removes this barrier of doing it right or wanting to do something right to just wanting to do it, like and also it helps you approach this work, this perspective, regardless of if you're playing a Mozart concerto or you're playing a folk song. It makes you approach it from a place of I desire to play this music, I desire to appropriate it and make it my own and communicate it as such, and I'm playing it from a place of I want to communicate it and I have something to add to it personally. But it's not the default. I agree with you that it's not the default when we're in conservatory, because we're trying to navigate doing what is being asked of us to do and doing it the right way. Sometimes we didn't even choose maybe the piece, maybe it's une œuvre imposée, or so it's different also because you're kind of forcing maybe a relation to it, which will grow over time, no doubt. But it maybe would not have been your first choice, maybe if it were up to you. But I think developing a personal approach to a piece and reminding yourself also that these creators, whether it was Haydn or Mozart or Beethoven or Bach, they were also excellent improvisers. And they were excellent instrumentalists and multi-instrumentalists. They played many instruments. They navigated seamlessly, and many times also, a lot of what we were working with is actually restitution. So also accepting the idea that this is a translation of a translation of a translation. Of course, we have our texts. We have as close as possible to the material itself, but in the case of Bach, for example, it was very coded until it wasn't. But the way we've received it is extremely coded. And so there is a large part of personal interpretation that we move aside to be able to perform something the way that is asked of us. And sometimes it can be a challenge, because then it kind of affects, especially because we do it as young children. So it kind of scars forever the way we play this music and the way we approach it, because it's always from a place of, I need to do it correctly. So giving yourself the permission to approach it from a different angle, as freely as you would approach a folk song or a piece of music that is transmitted to you, that just because you've grown up loving and listening to, trying to apply that approach and make it your own, I think heals a lot of it as well. I mean, you want your relationship to this music and to this repertoire to be also healed. You want to play it from a place of health. I'm playing this music because I love it. And this idea of writing my own cadenzas helped me a lot with that. Because by writing my cadenzas, it means I was fetching material from elsewhere in the piece. But I was playing it like doodles, almost like doodling with it, noodling with it. And learning some parts by heart, and learning some parts and adding ornamentation to it. And it kind of, ça a décomplexifié un peu ma relation avec. So yeah, I think just giving yourself the permission to go there and treat it, even if it's not going to be the way you're going to perform it, but treating those pieces a little bit like lead sheets in the way that you're learning them, I think heals a lot of your relationship to them.
Thank you. Yes. I don't know if we do have other questions, probably for Layale. About her path, her music, I don't know. No? Okay. So probably we have to stop here, if it's good for you. Yeah.
Merci, Pauline.
Merci. Thank you very much. Thank you, Layale. Okay. Et puis, so, wow. So we invite you, so tonight's concert, 9 p.m. in the Conservatoire, Layale Chaker and Sarafand. And on vous donne rendez-vous également demain pour le prochain Midi du Festival avec Leonardo Garcia Alarcón. Voilà, nous vous souhaitons une excellente journée. Merci beaucoup.